So what's the deal with due diligence in North Carolina real estate? In this video, we're going to talk about it. Hey, my name is Chris, and I see a lot of questions, especially from people relocating, about what exactly is the due diligence process in North Carolina and why is the fee non-refundable? So I want to take a few minutes and break it down. The North Carolina offer to purchase and contract is an as-is due diligence contract. And what this means is the buyer is buying the home in its present condition with all defects. But they have a due diligence period, which is simply time and discovery for the buyer to make sure this is the home they absolutely want to buy. And in order to get that time, they are offering the seller money for it in the form of a non-refundable fee. Within this period of time, which is negotiable between the buyer and seller, it's a time for the buyer to do any sort of inspections or research on the property to make sure it is definitely the house that they want. This can include inspections, insect or termite inspections, radon tests, the appraisal, securing their financing, etc. And the seller has the obligation to allow the buyer reasonable access to the property to do these sort of inspections during this time. The due diligence period will start as soon as both parties sign the contract and is usually 2 to 4 weeks. However, that is negotiable and can depend on the market or if you're in a competitive offer situation. But the shorter a due diligence period, the better from the seller's perspective. So that may be something a buyer wants to offer the seller if you're in a competitive situation or a seller's market like we are today. But also know, should the buyer want to make any requests, it might come back on, say, the inspection report or there's an appraisal issue, etc. The buyer will need to get back to the seller with their findings, and any requests will need to be negotiated prior to 5 p.m. on the expiration of the due diligence period. Now keep in mind, the seller is not obligated to fix any requests. They can negotiate or reject these asks because North Carolina homes are sold as is. And getting an extension on the due diligence period is possible and again renegotiable. However, it's usually unlikely in our current seller's market because sellers feel very confident that their home will sell, whether to one buyer or another. If something major is found though, like structural issues, termites, roof leaks, etc., and is reported to the seller, that would be considered a material fact now that needs to be redisclosed or repaired by them if they were to put the property back on the market. So in that scenario, by bringing up those critical items, it would put the buyer in a place of power when renegotiating under due diligence. So the fee that's offered with the due diligence period is not required, but most sellers will not take your offer without a fee. You can look at it like the buyer is compensating the seller for taking their home off the market for them. Now this fee is market driven, so there's no set amount for it, but it can range anywhere from a few $100s to a few $1,000s or even more, depending on the house, the market, or if there's a competitive situation, etc. So it's definitely one of those matters and amounts that a buyer will really want to talk with a real estate agent about to get a gauge on what they should go in at, to be competitive, that they're comfortable with, and that the sellers would be willing to accept. And your agent should be able to help you decide why you might choose one due diligence period and fee for a particular property based around your needs and the situation. This fee will be a check that the buyer makes out directly to the seller at time of contract and will be property of the sellers from this time. However, it will credit back to the buyer when and if they close on the home, usually as part of their down payment. Now, the buyer can back out of the contract for any reason or no reason at all, whether the inspection didn't go well, the sellers don't want to fix something, or they simply just change their mind. And in this case, they will forfeit their due diligence fee to the seller should they choose to terminate the contract. Now, if the seller was to breach the contract for some reason, let's say they didn't want to sell the house, the buyer has the right to get their due diligence fee back, but in virtually any other scenario, once the buyer writes that due diligence check to the seller, consider it gone unless they close on the home. So that's the due diligence process in a nutshell. I hope it clarified or explained this somewhat confusing process a little more, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and I'll do my best to help in any way. With all that said, we'll wrap this video up. If you enjoyed it, I hope you give it a like and leave a comment below if you've recently purchased a home in North Carolina. Let me know how your due diligence process went. If you're interested in coming along on my journey as a real estate agent or for more videos like this, I hope you consider subscribing. But until next time, let's make every day count, be more than average, and I'll see you in the next video.